welcome and happy Monday. It's This Is Going Well, I Think, with David Cooper. I'm your host, David Cooper. It's This Is Going Well, I Think, the show where no one's listening, no one cares. The show where every episode's the last episode. Today on the show, we've got conspiracy theory expert Dr. Lee Kuhnle, who, if you haven't checked him out already, has a great podcast called The Uncover Up. Check it out. But he's going to be on the show to answer the question, what can we learn from flat earthers? You might be thinking to yourself, what we can learn from flat earthers is they're idiots. Well, yes, and there's a lot more to it than that. Why people believe these things and what we can learn from why they believe these things. So you've got that to look forward to. And you may be wondering to yourself, where has Tony 5 been? I want Tony 5. Or maybe I hate Tony 5. I'm so glad he's not here. But whatever way you slice it, Tony has not been feeling well. So please drop him a line. Wish him well. You can tweet at him at RealTony5, send him a DM on Instagram at Ants1701, or email him tony@internet.internet. I don't think that last one will work. So let's ease on into the stories of the day, then go into what we can learn from people who think the earth is flat. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's dose of you can't make this stuff up, a woman is suing the Disneyland resort because, get this, Goofy fell on her. Yes, Goofy, as in the character, not a clumsy person, though arguably he's both in this case. Now, imagine you're having your Disney dream vacation, enjoying a day with your family. You're standing there with your daughter. You notice a shoelace undone. You do what any parent would do, bend over to tie your daughter's shoe. And wham, Goofy, in full costume, barrels into you like he's auditioning for a linebacker position. The result? Unsurprisingly, several injuries because, as it turns out, Goofy is not just big on the screen. Now, the woman who this happened to, she isn't sitting this one out. She's taking the whole crew to court. Disneyland, Goofy himself, even Goofy's handler, because apparently Goofy, well, can't be trusted to roam free. These Disney characters have handlers whose job is essentially to play the human GPS for these characters, making sure they don't mow down visitors, trip over things, make mistakes, and it looks like this handler skipped their shift. Or maybe, just maybe, Goofy just can't be tamed. And while the details are kind of sketchy on how exactly damaged this plaintiff is, she's talking permanent injuries and emotional pain here in the lawsuit. So I guess it's not just a sprained ankle and a bad day. It's more like a call the lawyers and make this thing a blockbuster event. And boy, is it one. The woman is demanding a jury trial to get compensation for her medical bills, lost earnings, and for a little thing Goofy went done and gone wrong, called negligence. I mean, a day at Disney should leave you with lighter wallets, generally feeling unhappy and like you've been pushed around by strangers, but not by Goofy, and you shouldn't have a heavier medical file afterward. The case is set to hit the courtroom in September, and hopefully it's Disneyland's next big attraction. Talk about an unhappy place on earth, eh? So next time you're at Disneyland, maybe wear some pads, maybe wear some padding. Old football gear sounds great, because you too may not be safe from a Goofy incident. Because if getting tackled by Goofy doesn't sound fun to you, maybe Disneyland isn't for you. But to be honest, it kind of sounds fun to me. So stay tuned. This might be the most entertaining show Disney's put on in years. In a world where we debate the merits of AI assistance comes a story from India with a monkey? Yes, Alexa, that little cylindrical know-it-all device from Amazon, has turned a hero in India. She recently saved a toddler in India from what would have been a horrible run-in with a monkey. So here's what happened. A father steps out to run a quick errand, leaving the door of his home ajar. Enter stage left, a large, ferocious, food-seeking monkey who probably said something like this to his monkey self. When one door closes, another one opens. Especially if it's not closed properly. Anyway, inside the apartment is a 13-year-old girl and her 15-month-old niece. And they're playing quietly when suddenly it isn't child's play anymore at all. It's monkey play, and the monkey enters the house. It's not the kind you can just easily shoo away with a banana. But thinking quick, the 15-year-old, seeing the impending doom, does what any tech-savvy teenager in a pinch might do. She doesn't call for help. She doesn't freeze. She asks Alexa to impersonate a dog. And just like that, Alexa starts barking, a feature I'm sure was intended for party tricks, not scaring away monkeys. The result, the monkey swiftly makes an exit through the window. Even to monkeys, the fear of a barking dog runs deep. The teenager, reflecting on the moment, says she was scared but very determined, and her quick wit, guided by the glowing ring of our favorite digital assistant, Alexa, saved the day. So next time you think of permanently disabling your smart devices because they listen in on you, which I myself do, I hate smart devices, but just remember, leaving it on might save you from a wild animal invasion, might save you from the beasts. And who said technology couldn't be as good as a guard dog? Alexa, who's a good girl? Okay, all right, okay. Coming up in just a few moments, it'll be Conspiracy Corner with conspiracy theory expert Dr. Lee Kuhnle on what we can learn from flat earthers. Sounds stupid, probably is. There might be some serious learnings here. This might border on educational. And this might be the toolkit that you need to deconvert anyone with wackadoodle beliefs. Spoiler, using science and evidence doesn't work. At least that's according to Dr. Lee Kuhnle, so stick around. Lee Kuhnle, doctor, professor of political science at Humber College, co-host.
Hi, David.
Of the I'm giving you this dramatic introduction. You can't say
I'm
hello
sorry,
yet.
I cut you off. You keep going, please.
I mean, you co-host the Uncover Up podcast, an amazing podcast about conspiracy theories. And recently you were voted most handsome host of the Uncover Up by me right now.
I love it. Nice to see you, David. I'm glad to be back on the show.
Does it make you uncomfortable that I call you handsome every time I interview
No,
you?
this is actually the main reason I show up here. This is why I do it.
Yeah, I guess see, I would interview someone all the time if they called me handsome, but it just doesn't. I'm not fishing for a compliment. Okay, I am fishing. Never mind.
You are also handsome.
Oh my God.
You are very handsome, David.
And that concludes the homoerotic section of this show. I was wondering what we would chat about today, and you have lessons, or at least you have things you think, I hope, we might learn from flat earthers. These are people who are often laughed at, but for some of them, these are sincerely held beliefs. It's wild. I listen to this one podcast. It's like a skeptics podcast, and people call in, usually religious people call in and make their arguments for why they believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior. But this one guy called in recently and was trying to say how everything to do with the world being round, the earth being round, was a conspiracy, and his best source of evidence was something about Red Bull skydiving from like this highest skydive, and in the video the earth didn't look quite as round as it should. And I'm like, that's your best evidence? He's like, well, I have a lot of evidence. And the host says the sum of a lot of bad evidence does not equal good evidence. It's like the maximum value of your evidence. So if you have like a bunch of 9s and then you have a 10, you don't have the sum of everything, you just have a 10. If you have a bunch of 1s and then a 2, you just have a 2. Anyway, I'll stop talking. I am curious. What can we learn from flat earthers?
It's such a riddle, right? It's such a riddle. And this was actually put to me as I was on the train going to see the solar eclipse. And I was going out with my buddy, and he turns to me sort of in exasperation. It was a long train ride. And he was like, what is up with flat earthers? And it's something that, I have been curious about myself. And it was for a long time this really hard kind of conceptual puzzle to crack, because, we know that there are real conspiracies, MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, Watergate, whatever. We know that there's also like really plausible ones that'll maybe turn out not to be true. But then there's the flat earthers and conspiracies like it that are so obviously wrong, so obviously demonstrably wrong. What's interesting about the flat earth conspiracy is that like backyard science can actually prove it wrong. It's not like we need super sophisticated tech. You don't actually need to go into space. There's ways in which if you are skeptical, you could actually prove it one way or the other to yourself. So he turns to me and he's like, what is this? And I had to agree that this was something that I had struggled with for so long. And so I thought, though, that in what I discovered in what brings people and keeps people in the flat earth theory was for me really revelatory and really helpful, because the way I think we would normally deal with it, even if we don't do it out loud, is just to use a concept like stupidity. Like, well, they're just dumb. And that seems to explain something, but it doesn't really. Like, it doesn't
further isolates these people, right? When you have sincerely held beliefs and everyone's calling you dumb, you either say, oh, I'm an idiot, which almost never happens, or you double down on your beliefs and you isolate others while doing so.
Exactly. So there's that problem, which we find more and more in conspiratorial discourses, where the two sides just don't talk to each other because they both call each other idiots. Nobody, as you say, likes to be called idiot. Never changes anyone's mind. And what I, though, bristle at is also just the fact that that doesn't actually explain what's happening here. It dismisses the phenomenon, but it doesn't, because, like, I don't really have hard evidence for this, but they can't be that dumb because they're managing to survive in the world. Like, they don't say, oh, cars aren't real and then get run over. Like, that level of, if it were just plain stupidity, would catch up with you in some way before you have made it into adulthood, right? So I personally don't find that that is much of an explanatory resolution. So what's going on? What's going on? So, okay. There's like three thoughts that want to come out of my mouth at once here.
Say them all at the same time.
Yeah, all at the same time. So one of the clues that got me thinking about this in a totally different way, I think it was actually a Vice documentary where they looked at the recruitment strategies used by neo-Nazis to get young new members. And that was also always a question to me because, like Flat Earth, neo-Nazi ideology is super dumb. And you're like, why would anybody, especially today, especially in North America, especially in urban environments, be at all vulnerable to that? Like, how is that possible?
And is it the same process? You call the neo-Nazi, you call the kind of person who's holding these beliefs an idiot, and they either say, oh yeah, that is racist and awful, or they double down, they isolate themselves further, they only want to be around people who validate their beliefs. Like, is it that same pattern? And furthermore, is this pattern a microcosm for like what happens to the left and the right in the United States? But that's zooming up perhaps a little bit too high.
No, I think this is it. I think there are larger lessons to be learned here outside of just the conspiratorial world. And I again agree with you that once people are kind of invested in an ideology, then this kind of name calling really doesn't work at all. But what my curiosity was, say, with the neo-Nazi recruitment strategies, is how do you get somebody who isn't a neo-Nazi into that kind of scene? Right? Like, they didn't, like, let's say somebody who doesn't come out of this is, say, a family background or something. And so looking at their recruitment strategies kind of opened my eyes to this whole new way of looking at it. Now, basically, very quickly, what happens is they'll send some older guys, some older neo-Nazis to a school. So these will be like 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And their job is to scout who is not doing well. Like, you're not going to hit up the popular kid. You're not going to hit up the head of the football team or the guy with the girlfriends or, that kind of stuff.
Someone who's struggling.
Exactly. You're looking for the loner. You're looking for the quote unquote loser. You're looking for the person who's not doing well. And then you don't approach them with any kind of ideology. You approach them with, hey, here's some music. And hey, do you want to come to a party? And of course, a lot of times these people who have nothing else going on particularly, and probably family stress, whatever, are like, okay, and then what they get out of that is a kind of a community. And that's the key, right? Is that what they then experience is, oh, I have like ready-made friends here. I have access, say, to women, to girls, like other people who are actually interested in me. I'm part of this community. And now by and by, the ideology is introduced, by which time this kid has already been hooked. because of something else. And if the price to pay is like I have to pay lip service to some stupid thing, then sure, a lot of people will do that. So the idea here is that it's more important to have friends than to be right. And this is almost exactly what is the underlying dynamic, I think, in some of the really implausible conspiratorial movements. What we do is assume that these are all rational, fact-based propositions, and then you've got an argument, and I'm going to counter that with another argument. And if we approach it like that, it's just bizarre, and it totally doesn't make any sense.
But this need for community, if we look at it from that lens, it actually starts to make a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense because if, conspiracies really blew up to like a completely new level during the COVID lockdowns. Why? Well, a lot of people who are already not, we're not in a great social situation, great relationship, they totally crumbled.
Things went from bad to worse.
Exactly. And what came in to fill the void were very open and accepting communities, right? Like the anti-vax community will say things like, you are right to be worried about the vaccine. You're a good mother for worrying. We care about you. We care about your body. We're going to listen to you.
And the other side is saying, hey, just stay inside or you're a bad person. It's like you either engage with that or you engage with this warmth and community. Lee, we're going to take a quick break and pick it up from here. This is we're on the precipice of something great. I'm here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. We'll be back in just a moment. I am here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. He's an expert in conspiracy theories. He is a political science professor at Humber College. Check out his podcast called The Uncover Up, all about conspiracy theories. We were talking about what we can learn from flat earthers. And rather than looking at people who believe in a flat earth, people who believe in horrible ideology like neo-Nazism, people who are anti-vaxxers, rather than look at it from kind of a science-based, here's the facts, here's my proposition, here's your proposition, the facts support mine, therefore you're wrong, therefore you're an idiot. If we look at it from that lens, we're never going to make any progress. But if we look at it from the lens of, hey, there's a community, and people's need for community is more important than their need to be right or agree with a mainstream thinking. And just like that, if we look at it from that lens, it starts to make a lot more sense why people would be flat earthers. Did I summarize that correctly, Lee?
That was amazing. I mean, if you had been in my position, we would have been off the air in like 2 minutes, because that's exactly, I got to call you up next time I'm writing these sections down, because that was a very pithy summary.
All right, we're talking about conspiracy theories, and we're giving a lesson into summarizing a conversation so you can continue it. A necessary skill for nobody but me. You were just we had just come to this point, which is fascinating to me. What do we learn when we look at it from that lens, that flat earthers, people who sincerely hold these beliefs, aren't to be judged based on whether what they believe is true, but rather how they engage with their community and how that community validates them and how that gives them a sense of belonging and purpose?
I think for me, certainly the lessons were manyfold. One of them was that when we attack these beliefs from this kind of rational position, especially as kind of smug urban liberals, who are like, you're an idiot for believing this stuff. What's happening is that, as you said earlier, we're driving people more into those communities. We're not having a conversation. We're pushing people away back into that very kind of accepting community that's like, yeah, they're idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. And you're right. I see this kind of divide, right? Like as a kind, sort of self-flatteringly, as an educated urban left-wing guy, I can see myself looking down at people who have these beliefs, who are often, not always, but often less educated, sometimes more rural. Again, it's not always like this, but there'll be kind of caricatures that I build around, I think that we build around who those other people are.
And I think they build those caricatures of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I find that, look, I love like Jon Stewart and John Oliver, and those guys are, they're really funny. I enjoy watching them, but their shtick is really built on those guys over there are super stupid. And
they are comedians, to their credit.
They are comedians slash also sometimes the best news source that we have today, unfortunately. Like it's actually
and I feel like they do hide behind that. Like Jon Stewart hides behind the tagline of The Daily Show, where it's like, from the world's most trusted reporters at Comedy Central, but then they actually are the ones spewing the quote unquote facts, and people do watch those shows as their only source of news. But anyway, we're kind of getting far from the point here.
Yeah. So no, to your earlier question, which is like, what did I take away from this was that when I'm attacking that belief system, I'm attacking that person's access to their community. And that's where the resistance comes from. And that's why it's also so difficult to have what we would consider a sort of rational debunking type conversation. If somebody's gone too far along the line of becoming indoctrinated into a community, they're invested not because of the belief system, but because of the access to people and community that belief system provides. And I feel like we tend to do it the wrong way around, right? We look at what is it that you believe instead of why is it that you believe these things. And I don't know if that brings us any closer to solving any of the real problems in our political discourse, as you were saying, between, say, the left and the right. But I think it repositions it in a way where we can understand why we're unable to talk to each other.
What's scary to me is it feels like the way it should go down is at the core of these groups. Let's take neo-Nazism. There might be one or two bad actors who really know what they're doing, who really are hateful, and who really are kind of spreading these awful beliefs amongst the group. Yeah. And then you get the people that we're talking about who want to feel like they have community. But sometimes there is no core person, or maybe that person is long dead. I mean, let's think religion. Let's think Scientology. Like L. Ron Hubbard's not around any. So you can have all these people that have these odd beliefs that come together and are isolated from the rest of the world because those beliefs are just too far out there or deemed too negative or too whatever. But at the core, there isn't this bad actor. So how do you dismantle communities like that? Like, how would you seek to dismantle a community of flat earthers spreading this nonsense?
It's a difficult question. And I think it's not one that is as easily changed as we would like. It's not something you could just throw money at, or you could just, send them to some kind of re-education thing. I think though, it needs to happen at the level of community. Now, in my own experience,
I'm thinking of Colombia when they legitimized FARC, like the rebels, the guerrillas who were fighting the government and controlling the drug trade and kidnapping and killing politicians and causing havoc in Colombia. The government just one day announces, hey, we've made a peace deal with FARC. These people are legitimate. They can now run for office. And they just integrated the communities. Like they integrated these guerrillas who've been fighting the government with the military. It was wild. And I couldn't believe it's one of these things in my lifetime that I never thought I would see. I don't know I'm very not that educated about this. What I just spewed out is about all I know. But I do wonder, is integrating communities, however different they are, a one way to kind of dismantle this stuff?
I definitely think so. And this work goes to a guy who was actually one of the founders of crisis communication. He was sort of like a gun for hire when, say, an oil company would do like a big spill and they needed to then communicate this to the public. And he would come and he would sort of explain, how can you actually talk to a hostile audience? Now, he didn't only do it for bad actors. It would be people like wind farms, and they would want to put up wind turbines near certain communities. And those communities were absolutely convinced that they increased rates of cancer or this and that, even though there wasn't any evidence for this. And so his whole job, Peter Sandman is his name, and he's lovely because he's put all his work online for free, all his lectures, all his writing, you can get all of it, Peter Sandman. And he talks about addressing sort of like validating the emotional content of it. So this would be very much in terms of like discourse when you're talking with one or another person who believes something that is just like totally, out there, a real fringe belief, the flat earth, the neo-Nazi. Now, I have to say, in my own experience, it does matter how far along that path they've gone. If they are like 100%, this is the new me now, it might, in my experience, I've not been very successful at calling people back and getting them back. But if you get them early enough in the path along that trajectory and you validate some of the concerns, if not the interpretations, like, yeah, science is sometimes super, is it, first of all, it can, in the history of science, it's been wrong. And there are really devastating uses of scientific knowledge, the nuclear bomb, stuff like that. So if somebody's feeling alienated from the scientific discourse, or if somebody's feeling sort of stupid because they don't understand, like I don't understand anything anymore in terms of like what's going on in any of the scientific disciplines. I have no idea. Like it's so far beyond me. We can validate the underlying anxiety or tension. That sometimes is like a half measure in order to be able to kind of start a dialogue again. If you think about, again, trying to say, what can we learn from the flat earthers? And you were zooming out into the political world. What are the frustrations that are animating the Trump voters? Well, some of them are going to be things that I can't deal with.
Let's put a pin in that and come back and relate this to what are some of the frustrations causing groups that we see as fringe, or groups that we see as different than us, or groups that we might liken to flat earthers. I'm here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. Stick around. We are here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle, who is the host of the Uncover Up podcast. It is a podcast about conspiracy theories. He is an expert in conspiracy theories. When I call you an expert, are you like, oh God? Or are you like, yes, I am? Because whenever anyone calls me an expert in anything, I'm like, no, I'm not.
Well, yeah, no, I feel comfortable in that role now. Ooh. Because it is really my entire working life. It's what I teach at my college. I teach various sets of courses, but it's all about conspiracies. I'm writing about it. I've got the podcast. So if I have any value whatsoever, and it's true, it's questionable if I do, but if I have any professional value, it is as being an expert in conspiracy theories.
It's in your analysis of the stuff. Before we jump back into our previous conversation about what we can learn from flat earthers, what is it about conspiracy theories? It sounds like you need to be in this field. Like you are fascinated by, like if it seems like you don't have a choice. You're like an artist in this way. You have to be in this area. Maybe I'm misrepresenting you, but what is it that you find so interesting about this field?
I've always been really captivated by the role of ideas in public spaces and public discourses. And my initial foray into this was looking at religious discourses or religion in secular discourses and how that just continued to play a role. Back when I was first interested in this, everybody I floated this idea with thought I was completely off base. And then George W. Bush Jr. wins because he was able to mobilize up until that point, kind of latent religious base of American voters. And then we suddenly see like today, it's not a big deal to say.
I remember when the Tea Party was camping out at the White House and we were all laughing. And now that's basically Trump is the Tea Party, and he was
exactly.
Is it? So, I think I've said this to you before, and you're like, "It's an interesting theory, David, but it's not quite matching with my lived experience." Is it because you were born in Germany before the wall fell that maybe gets you interested in this stuff because of those divisions in that society there, or did you move to Canada when you were so young? It's hard to.
I moved to Canada too young to understand the divisions. I remember watching television, it was news, and it was actually East German, or there was something about East Germany, and my dad blurted out, "Oh, they're all nuts." And I had to get him to explain to me, like, what are you talking about? aren't they Germans? No, there's a different Germany. And what's the problem? Well, they can't leave the country. And it was a shock to me, but I left too young to really understand. So who knows? Who knows what the initial things were that got me into it? But I've always been captivated by the question of sort of ideas in public discourses, especially ones that don't really have a kind of basis in reality, Now, when it came to conspiracies, and I've said this before on your show, I encountered a lot of my own secret prejudices that I didn't know I was carrying with me. And so I would dismiss ideas out of hand because I'm like, well, that's dumb. But then if I looked into it, I realized that actually there's a lot of stuff here that is really a lot more plausible than I thought. So I don't know, something about this field captivated me, and it's endless. Like, it just keeps giving and giving.
You're living in a great time for it.
Right?
All right, let's get back to our discussion. We were discussing what people can learn from people who believe that the earth is flat earthers. We were discovering that community is what causes people to have these beliefs, not just a look at the science and rational analysis. It's really that need for and validation by community. And from that, you pose the question, what are some of the frustrations of Trump voters that would cause them to form a community around that figure that maybe some of us wouldn't agree with?
Right. So, and this developed out of your question about, like, well, how would you disrupt one of these communities? And I'm like, I don't know, but at least discursively, when you're dealing with people one-on-one, one thing that helps is to validate some of the underlying frustrations, tensions, anxieties, fears, without necessarily validating the theory in which they've interpreted those frustrations, anxieties, whatever.
Can I give a quick example? Like, I don't trust pharmaceutical companies and I don't trust the government. So, like, when I'm talking to an anti-vaxxer, like, I can agree on those points, but that's kind of where it ends for me. It's like, yes, I trust this vaccine. Yes, I trust the modern medical process. I trust the peer review process. But, and just like that, I can have a conversation with them rather than just right out the gate, like, you're an idiot for not believing vaccines work.
Exactly. Because who wants to be told they're an idiot? I mean, look, there's been times, unfortunately too often, when I have been proven wrong, like demonstrably proven wrong. And I hate it.
Are you sure it's just not everyone else's fault when you're wrong? Because that's what I learned from my parents.
Exactly. Well, that's of course the first place I go, right? But even if I can come to admit it later, it's not an easy thing in the moment, especially if there's other people watching. If this is something that happens in a classroom situation or in a public debate or wherever. And so there's no headway there. No matter how right you are and how wrong somebody else is, sort of a public smackdown is never going to work. It makes for good comedy, a la, the comedians we referenced earlier, John Oliver, whatever, but it doesn't work in terms of actually changing people's mind. What does is, just as you said, like with the anti-vaxxers, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm also distrustful of pharmaceutical companies. But more than that, we know that there's been kind of, if not fraudulent, but really dubious stuff that the American government has done historically, either with racialized communities like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, or more recently in looking for Osama bin Laden. They did that under cover of forget which vaccine, but they did it under the cover of a vaccine drive where they were secretly harvesting DNA from children living in areas in which Osama bin Laden was thought to exist.
To see if they were his kids.
To see if they were his kids. And then they found his kids. And then they, in short order, found him. And so we can validate, like, yeah, the government is sometimes sketchy on this stuff. Yeah, pharmaceuticals are big corporations. Yeah, and this is something that discursively, the mainstream medical communicators didn't do a great job of. There are risks to the vaccine. Now, I'm vaccinated. My kids are vaccinated. I will get any vaccine that I can. I totally think that the risks massively, no, I said it the wrong way around, that getting the vaccine is way safer.
The benefits outweigh the risks.
Thank you very much for saving that sinking ship. So there's lots of stuff that we can we can agree on without then having to take the step that, oh, it's all because of some grand theory about white genocide or putting nanochips in it, or, the whole thing is fake and there's a totalitarian state coming and whatever. And that opens the door because we're not attacking the belief system directly, but we're almost opening an opportunity for a kind of connection.
So when you ask the question what your frustrations are, you're really trying to open that door. Maybe we can agree on your frustrations and from there form just the beginnings of mixing communities that wouldn't normally get along.
I mean, look, if we're going to be honest, there's a lot of people who got screwed over by the Clintonite kind of, liberal free trade model, and then they were told when their factories disappeared, they were told, well, it's kind of your fault for being working class, get a job or get an education, become more like us, downtown hipsters. And people got mad, and people really
surprise.
Right. And so and in all of this, I don't want to validate these absurd theories. I am obviously, I don't need to say it, but I'm going to cover all bases. I am not a Trump voter. I believe in vaccines. I think the earth is round, and I'm pretty sure I can prove it.
I hope you're not a Trump voter. As a Canadian, that's a felony to vote in another country.
The ideas they're not correct, obviously, but I think that, again, what we can take away from sort of examining what the underlying psychological and sociological mechanisms that bring people into the flat earth community, when we see how that's working, I think it gives us a sort of insight into all the other kind of out there, bizarre, outlandish claims that you can disprove, and yet people are totally beholden to them.
Wow. I love that as a way to summarize it and a lens to look at this stuff. So the next time you hear someone spewing out wild theories, look deeper. Look at the question, what community does this provide the person? Not how did they scientifically come to these conclusions?
No.
I have one more question for you. And I've always found it curious that and this is just my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but flat earthers, there was something called the Flat Earth Society. Maybe it still exists. And it was a drinking club of people who didn't actually believe the earth was flat.
Oh, wow. I got to look into that, because there is a Flat Earth Society that is all about the flat earth.
Oh.
So I didn't know about the drinking society.
I thought maybe it's a different group, but I thought there was like a group of British scientists who these are like high profile scientists who jokingly joined this group. And so to me, it's like, and they would put out fake, junky, jokey science proving the earth was flat. Meanwhile, they're publishing physics papers and, real science. And then like QAnon, not clear whether Q was doing it as a joke, a weird performance art project, maybe something Joker style like Batman. And then birds are not real. Like that's another joke. But people latch onto these things and then they believe them. It is curious how some of these things can start as a joke and then take a mind of its own.
Nathan, my co-host of the Uncover Up, and I have often toyed with the idea of creating a fake conspiracy so that we would be able to point to it as the kind of thing that, well, we know 100% this is not true because we are the original founders of the idea. Now, it gives us too much credit that it would actually take off like something like birds aren't real. But nonetheless, what's held us back is that once these ideas leave and enter the ecosystem,
you lose control over them.
You lose control of it. And they're not funny anymore when a lot of people start believing this kind of stuff, right? And then maybe even acting on it, which is even more scary.
I'm going to start the Dr. Lee Kuhnle is not handsome conspiracy because it's demonstrably false. It's demonstrably false. Lee, thank you for coming here. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time and be well.
Thanks for having me, David. Always a great pleasure.
You made it this far. Thank you so much. I'll be back here tomorrow night. And if you want, and I'm hoping you do want, drop Tony5 a line, wish him well on Twitter at RealTony5, that's F-I-V-E, or at Ants1701 on Instagram. Please send him a nice note. I'm sure he'll really appreciate it. I'm Andy Rooney, and this is 60 Minutes. That joke would have killed like 30 years ago.